Okay, when refitting the speaker here, if you could see at the very bottom, just here, there's a little raised part of plastic just above my finger there. Might be quite hard to see. The speaker actually has a little indentation at the bottom here where the wires come out. So that makes the speaker sit in the proper place. So we make sure that that sits on that little raised part there, and then the speaker can't turn once it's set in there. So that's how you know your speaker's in the right way. If you don't put it in like that, it won't sit right, and it could possibly rattle about or even fall out at a later date. Next, we're going to refit this plastic ring. The plastic ring does have a lip around the edge of it here, which needs to go down the way. So we'll set it back onto the 3 plastic spuds here. And then what we need to do is melt those spuds back down. And to do that, I just use the tip of my soldering iron. So you just take the tip of your soldering iron and just push it into the hole a bit and drag across, and just melt the plastic a little bit like that. That's more than enough to hold it. And do that on all 3 spuds here. And the last one here. And that's more than enough to hold the speaker in place. Next, we want to refit the buttons and the D-pad. The D-pad is a symmetrical shape, so it doesn't matter what way you drop it into the hole. And then we can put the pressure pad back in, and it sits on 2 little plastic spuds here either side, so you really can't go wrong with that one. For putting the buttons back in, obviously the start button will only go in where it's meant to go, and one way. The A and B buttons, or sorry, the 1 and 2 buttons, they have little wings on them here, and the wings are offset, so again these can really only be put in the one way in the correct hole. If you put it in the wrong hole, it will be either very loose or very tight. And then we can set our contact pressure pads on top here. Ideally, you want to set this on something in the middle here. If you set this down, you will see it's pushing all the buttons up. So we'll find something and we'll set it up on the centre here, up off the surface, so that the buttons aren't disturbed while we're putting the motherboard back in. Okay, so I'm just using a roll of tape here, just to keep the buttons up off the surface here. So next you want to get your motherboard. Now the hardest part of doing this is getting all the dust away before you put this back together, and it's going to be hard for me because this screen still has its protective cover on the front, so basically I can't see if there's dust trapped behind the screen or not. But I will recommend, if you use a microfiber cloth like what I'm leaning on here, a microfiber cloth is very good at lifting dust. So we'll give it a wipe here and try our best to get all the dust away from under the screen. So once you've wiped the screen here with the microfiber cloth, it's a good idea to gently blow any dust away before you put this thing in. So you turn your motherboard upside down and you slot the contrast wheel up into the hole here first, and then drop the rest of it down. Sometimes this can take a little bit of fiddling, and the extension port there goes up into its slot. The speaker wire is stuck underneath there, so I'll just lift that out. Okay, so that's this motherboard in. You will feel when it's set in properly, and the motherboard has little indentations here where it sits around these legs, these where the screws go in. So it can take a little bit of fiddling to get this in, and again, because this still has the screen protector on it, I can't check if it has dust. I really want to keep the screen protector on here so when it returns to the owner, he can peel it off and it's perfect. Whereas if I peel it off now, there's a chance of putting a fresh scratch on the screen. So before we set it back down on the surface, I will stick a couple of screws in here. So I always like to put the two larger screws in on either side of the cartridge slot first. So once you have the two screws in here on either side of the cartridge slot, you can go ahead and start putting the little tiny screws in round the edge of the motherboard. What I normally do is I put the two screws in on the cartridge slot first, and I put a screw in on opposite corners here, and then that's a good time to flip the Game Gear over and just check your buttons are working. They should feel nice and springy, so they pop back up once you've pressed them, and the same for the D-pad, because sometimes with messing about putting the board back in, sometimes your little pressure pads can move, and you will feel it in the buttons. Either your buttons won't spring out or they won't actually go in when you press them. So now is a good time to test it before you put all the screws in, because if something's gone wrong, you're obviously going to have to take it all back out again. So we'll go ahead and refit the rest of these screws here. Another thing I'd like to point out here is the two little spuds that your pressure pad for the D-pad sits on actually protrude through the motherboard. So you can see one there, and the other one is just here. So you make sure your motherboard is down on top of those spuds, or your D-pad won't work properly. And that's the front half of the Game Gear back together. Simple as that. So now we'll move on to the back half of the casing. So the back half of the casing is nice and simple as well to put back together. Doesn't really matter where you start. So I'll start by putting our soundboard back in with its new capacitors. So you just need to put the wheel and the headphone jack up into the holes first, and then the rest of it will drop down into place, and we can screw that in. Again, a magnetic screwdriver is a big help here because these screws are very fiddly. Once you have your soundboard in, just do the same for the power board, making sure you put the top part of the switch on. Now this only goes on one way, If you put it on the wrong way, it will be very tight. So there's really only one way it can go on. You need to put that on before you drop your power supply back into the board here, or back into the casing, sorry. And again, we can go ahead and screw that in. After you have your power supply screwed in, you need to refit this little metal shield here. And again, just simply 4 screws hold it in. Nothing too technical about it here. And once you have your metal shielding screwed back in, it's time to just put the 2 halves of the Game Gear back together. And you just simply need to plug the 3 sets of wires in to the boards on the opposite side. Again, these can only go in one position, so you really can't plug these in wrong unless you would really have to force these in against their will, sort of thing, to plug them in the wrong place. So that's it, plugged back together. So we just fold the 2 halves back down, making sure that it closes well all round, and then we can go ahead and screw the 2 halves of the case back together. When screwing the 2 halves of the case together, I always like to do it in diagonals. I think it's the mechanic in me, from when I used to work at cars and tightening down cylinder head blocks. You always done it in a sequence to make sure it was an even torque across the case. So that's what I like to do. I put one in at the top corner here, and then one in here, and then I'll put this one in, and then this one. It just sort of tightens it all down nice and evenly. So once you have your 6 screws in here, you can go ahead and replace or refit the security screw. And last but not least, refit your battery covers. And there you have one refurbished Game Gear. Now all that's left to do is to plug in your favourite game and start enjoying this thing. I hope these videos were helpful for anyone who needed them. If you have any questions on any part of these tutorials, please feel free to get in touch with me. I will try my best to answer any questions you may have. And thanks for watching. Thanks for your support as always, and I'll catch you next time.